In this video, we're going to be interviewing Oliver Fetter, who is a mechanic and does a lot of stuff with diesel performance. He also happens to be my brother, as some of you may well know. Be sure you watch the whole episode because we're going to be talking about the trade-offs between diesel performance and diesel engine reliability, what you have to give up to get more power, how you get more power, and we're also going to be talking about Oliver's insane project that he's working on, doing something that, as far as we know, no one else has done with this particular diesel engine. Oliver, thank you for coming on the channel.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
So, obviously, you're my brother, and I've known that you enjoyed cars and stuff for quite a while. But for everyone else that doesn't know you, when did this all start?
Uh, well, the general interest in cars as a whole was kind of a mistake. My first car, kind of like sophomore year of college time frame, I bought a 81 VW diesel, and it was a terrible car. I I worked on it like all the time. It would never start because there was some kind of glow plugs wiring problem. And I think it was kind of necessity too. I also bought a piece of shit Mustang around that time.
The
So I had
5.0.
two terrible cars. Yes, the 5.0 kind of. And having two terrible cars at the same time is not what you need when you're going to school. And so I tried to take, I think even the Mustang at first to like Midas or something because it was having a fueling problem. Like it would stall just randomly. And after paying them $90 to do absolutely nothing and then tell me they couldn't do anything, I took it back and there was just like a pinched hose under the car somewhere, and that was the problem. So I feel like I've just had an unlimited number of those kind of experiences where I try not to work on my own cars and then I have to anyways because no one else would. And that just carried into a profession of working on vehicles. It's like I was divinely chosen to deal with this bullshit.
You were chosen to work on shit boxes.
Yes, exactly. That is where it started.
Dang. That sounds tough. So it sounds like it was kind of a trial by fire.
Certainly, certainly. Yeah.
So after college, kind of walk me through that. I know obviously you graduated, you were mechanical engineering major, kind of looked at doing some jobs like an official office white collar capacity, like had an internship, did all that, and then just after school decided that really wasn't for you, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, certainly had a few desk jockey positions, certainly as an intern, but didn't like any of them. And then when I graduated, it was like peak COVID. So even as a mechanical engineer, your like top paying salary was like $20,000 a year, which is absurd. So I just avoided doing any of that and started my own design consulting business using my degree. And that kind of went for a while until I got sick of being broke because I had like two clients. And then by this point, I had been like wrenching long enough that I finally transitioned that from being like a hobby into like something that makes money. I mean, I guess you call that a career, but at the time it wasn't a career, it was just kind of dabbling. And then over the course of kind of a few dabbles, I had an internship at a restoration shop, and I kind of decided that wasn't really for me, mainly because restoration is all about keeping things the same and perfect, and I don't like keeping things the same or perfect. And then after trying to avoid mechanic jobs a little more, with some other jobs, I ended up back at a mechanic job at a construction company, and that was pretty pivotal. I would say it was a terrible job, but I had to do kind of like all phases of maintenance, like coming up with what it need done, getting the parts, putting the parts in, making sure it worked after. I don't know. It was basically running a mechanic shop at some guy's construction company for him and kind of stuck with that for a while until it dawned on me that I was doing every part of a mechanic service but not being paid for it. And then I quit and started offering my own services kind of after that fact.
Yeah, that's crazy. I know, and the vehicles you were working on at that particular construction company, I remember getting a call from you where you were like had your head in a 6.0's engine bay and were busy replacing the EGR cooler, and you were like,
Yeah, sir.
who wants to and who would ever want to own one of these pieces of shit? But to be fair, 6.0 is like probably one of the more terrible ones. So
It's
yeah.
true. I mean, yeah, that job was just kind of all diesels too. It was interesting. It was like a terrible job because construction equipment sucks. None of it's taken care of. None of the workers take care of it. The owner doesn't take care of it, and it's all freaking dirty, like dirty, like inches of dirt on it, dirty when you're working on it, which makes it terrible. But it was interesting in that you saw diesel engines used in like every application. I mean, from like a sub 2 liter diesel motor powering a remote compactor that literally has like joysticks and shit going to it to run it, all the way up to like piece of shit international dump trucks that barely run and everything in between. So that was like, it was just cool to see it used in so many applications, and some of them too,
Mhm.
like obviously dump trucks and 6.0s and pickups are like one the genre of like engine to transmission, but then in other construction equipment, it's engine to hydraulic pump directly, and that does
Right.
everything. So that was really interesting to see.
Cool. What cars do you own now? Could you walk us through what your rigs look like?
Sure, yeah. So my kind of daily and also house, because it's a camper van, is a 2006 E350 Ford. I might have said that backwards. It's like a Ford Econoline van. Um, and I bought that kind of way too cheap. It was a huge pile when I bought it, and for some reason I've stuck with it. So presently, when I bought it, it had 225K. Everything was original, and it was falling apart. And currently, we're at just shy of 300,000 miles on it, but nothing is original, and everything is new. So
Including
I
the
don't know if
motor and the transmission. But to be fair, the original motor, you'd like just replace that. That was at
yeah,
what, 285 or 290?
yeah, right around 290. So this year, I started the year with a motor replacement, and then did some junk. Oh, and then did a well, I guess recent things is just I re-geared the back, put the limited slip in it, and then new motor, just the same one, nothing too complicated there. And then I rebuilt the transmission and out of the transfer case because I'm kind of on my way to 4-wheel drive, or I am now. Just need to slap like an axle under the front, but it's not really as easy as slapping one in there. So we're working on that part now. So that's the van, and that's my one vehicle. And then my other vehicle is still a Volkswagen Rabbit, just not the same one I previously mentioned. It's an 84 VW Rabbit. It's a 1.6 liter inline 4-cylinder turbo diesel, and I'm currently running a GT 2256 VK, which is a VNT variable nozzle turbine turbo off of a Sprinter van. So I'm running a turbo that's normally on like a 2.7 liter van on my 1.6 liter mini diesel, and it's going okay. And I'm controlling the VNT mechanism with an Arduino and some like sensors on the engine. So right now, kind of like big focus on tuning that. And I also like blew up a turbo on that one not too long ago. So the side focus is building a early TDI motor to which is a 1.9 liter to replace the 1.6 liter with. So I'm not driving around on a kind of toast motor.
Sounds like you have a lot going on. When you put
Oh
it out
no, it's
that
all
way,
fine.
it's funny because we talk really often on the phone. Like we'll call each other and just talk about projects and stuff. And usually mine is like, I rotated my tires today, and Oliver's is like, I built a transmission for my van, and that's kind of how it goes. But yeah, man, that's crazy. So you have like, I mean, you're kind of like on either end. I would say both vehicles, like your van is borderline performance because you have like the custom lift kit you did that you didn't mention, and you've done a lot of stuff to that. But that's kind of like on the, you want that to be reliable. It's your daily, like that thing has to drive. And then the Rabbit is kind of the mad scientist project where you're like taking a vehicle that's traditionally an economy car and boosting the snot out of it so it drives like pretty fast.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate statement. Yeah, and the van's kind of, I mean, it's not quite off-road performance yet. I mean, as far as Ford vans go, it's very off-road performance, but um, that's the direction it's trending in is, I think when I put the front axle in, I'm gonna three-link it too, so it has like nice travel and ride characteristics and just kind of keep her moving in that direction. It's never gonna be fast because it's a 5.4, but I mean, it gets the job done in a reliable fashion. And yes, the Rabbit is very much a test bed, especially right now because I'm building the other motor for it. I really don't give too many shits about the current motor that's in it, especially because it already ate one turbo. So if it eats another, it's fine.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, while we're talking about the Rabbit, um, I remember you had mentioned before we jumped on that you had run into a boost pressure, not necessarily an issue, but something that may warrant an adjustment. And this is kind of what I had teased earlier. At one point, the other Rabbit that Oliver had owned um, had compound turbos on it. And so it sounded like, based on kind of where you're at now, you're thinking you might try to put compounds on the current model. So could you walk us through kind of what led to that? And then also maybe even before that, for anyone that doesn't know, since this channel is mostly maintenance focused, maybe talk a
Yeah.
little bit about compounds. Because I've even in the future, I'm like, all right, when I decide to make my truck more performance oriented, I might like Pusher has a compound kit, but it's like, there's compounds, there's, sequentials, there's a lot of stuff going on there. So could you unpack all of that for us?
For sure, I can try. um,
Okay. So maybe just start with the first bit I mentioned, which are like, what are
yeah.
compounds, and then go to why you need them for the Rabbit.
Okay, that seems approachable. Um, well, I guess let's start with just turbos first. So, in general, every good statement starts with "in general." Uh,
Caveat.
in general, turbos have a set of specifications that define them for an application. In my particular circumstance, it's been difficult to size turbos because A, I'm stupid, and B, none of them are actually made for a 1980s 1.6 liter motor. And so I've spent a lot of time trying different turbos, and kind of the important specs around them is, I mean, there's a bunch of them. There's compressor maps and all kinds of crap. But given a certain target, the two things that actually matter is, can it sustain the pressure ratio I'm looking for, which is actually like how much air can my air compressor compress. Um, so pressure ratios are kind of like pressure ability to normal pressure is like the ratio. So the ratios are like anywhere from 1 to 5 or whatever. But you can correlate that to a boost number. So like my current turbo, for instance, taps out around like 30 to 40 psi of boost pressure, and that's like its absolute max might be 40. I don't even think we can get to 40 with it. And then the other thing that's important is flow rate. So if you put, even if I had a teeny tiny turbo that could do like pressure ratio 5. If you put it on your PowerStroke, you would choke the engine and it might not even turn on. So the other important characteristic about them is the housing and the turbine and the impeller and all of the workings of the turbo sized correctly to flow enough air for the given application you're looking at. So unlike a V8 PowerStroke with one turbo, you have a pretty big turbo because it's a V8 pushing a lot of air. And on my 1.6 liter, it's quite a bit smaller because you're not pushing nearly as much air. And conversely, if you put too big of a turbo on, nothing happens because it's basically just a glorified piece of exhaust tubing at that point because there's not enough flow to like make anything spin or spool or do anything fun. Um, that's the precursor to turbos. And so compounding turbos is necessary when you're looking for an even denser air charge. So turbos increase air density. Boost pressure is like a bastardized way of looking at density because pressure isn't density. They're different things. But there's a vague correlation to density with pressure. So we can just kind of say that and then move on.
Someone called Gail Banks. Someone said the word air density.
Oh, what's that, Gail? Yes, we're talking about air density. It's not the same as boost. Uh,
Oh, jeez.
no, for sure. And I mean, Gail has a ton of good videos. He's a little obnoxious, honestly, but the things he says are all absolute facts. So if you're interested in diesel tuning, watching some of the series where they tune stuff in his videos is so incredibly helpful. But at any rate, we're talking about pressure ratios. And so if you're looking for more air density, and in my particular circumstance, I'm at the limit of my current turbo on the Rabbit, where it's spooled up completely. We still have enough flow rate because it's a big turbo, but it can't actually compress the air any more than about, and again, I'm not going to say density, we're going to talk in pressure right now, but about 30-ish psi. And that's just because of the way the thing is designed. It actually, like, I can try to close the vanes more, but nothing happens. We're just going to get more back pressure and less boost, or maybe like a teeny bit more boost. And it's not super, like, you can't, if you go on pushing it, you're going to blow a turbo, and you do that, you ruin your motor. So instead of that, you can compound turbos, which is where you use two turbos kind of one after the other. You have your primary turbo, which is usually the smaller one, and they're slightly different sizes. I want to emphasize the slightly because if you try to put like a teeny tiny turbo with like a huge one, you run into flow issues again. Like the little turbo still has to flow enough air to let the engine do its thing, even though they're different sizes. So the whole point is you put a slightly smaller turbo with a slightly bigger turbo, and you get a bunch of effects. The first effect, and why it's called like compounding, is you get the first turbo is compressing air and giving that already compressed air. Let's say the first one does 20 pounds. And then it hands it off to the second turbo. And the second turbo is compressing air again, but it's not seeing it as this crazy job to take it from 20 pounds to 40 pounds. It's like the same as taking it from 0 to 20. So you're basically reducing the stress that each turbo undergoes in order to achieve your desired pressure and i.e. density at your intake. So, and then the other kind of positives that usually come out of compounding is that you choose two dissimilar sized turbos. So again, a smaller and a larger, and your smaller turbo will spool first, which gives you better throttle response. And you're not getting the full compounding effect until your second one spools too, but you're still getting 20 psi sooner than you used to have it. So you kind of get like a basket of good things when you do it, and probably the negative that comes out of it is that you make a shitload of heat that you have to do something with, i.e. you gotta like intercool the crap out of it. And then you also just have complexity. I mean, two turbos means double the oil feed lines, double the oil drain lines, double the plumbing, double all the crap. But I mean, it could be sweet. And so for my particular experience, when I was like 4 attempts ago at boosting my car, I tried like a bunch of sizes of turbo. They started way too big, and then went way too small, and then like still too small, and then like probably right at the right spot, but didn't use a wastegate, and then went back and tried compounds with something way too small and too small, which was cool and all because actually it was on the car. There were two turbos, one was smaller, one was bigger. They fed into each other, the whole thing. But it only ever made like 25 psi because it could only flow like, I don't know, two-thirds of the car's air CFM or whatever. It was like choking the entire system out. So you can't, I mean, and so now, just now, after screwing around with all these things, I now have a turbo, just one, the VNT that's on the Rabbit. And it's a little too big for the car. I actually just installed a tachometer for the first time, and the turbo spools like around like 3,000 RPM, and then it'll take you up to about 5,000 RPM, which is like kind of where the car stops making power, anyways. And so there's kind of a dead spot from like 2 to 3 or like 1 to 3. I don't know if you really ever get a turbo to spool at 1,000 RPM. But point being, it's laggy is one problem, and then we'll put that aside. And then the other problem is that now I've been kind of upping the boost levels, and I was excited to do so because I've been holding off for a while, hoping not to blow things up. And then I finally upped it, and it didn't up nearly as much as I thought I would get in terms of pressure, in terms of density.
So you
And
think at this
so
point it's being choked out then? Like you're saying that
kind of, and that's where turbos are funny. Is we're well within the flow limits of the system. Like the turbo is more than capable of flowing. Like it can flow enough air for a Sprinter motor, but it can't supply any more air compression than about 30 psi, which is an interesting thing to run into. So now, if I want more compression than that without absolutely grenading this one turbo, you kind of have two options, and I only get one because I have a small engine. But as a PowerStroke owner, you got multiple options. I mean, there are companies that make single turbos that are capable of really high pressure ratios. You can run a big single and make 80 psi easily on certain performance diesel trucks, but good luck buying a big single for my 1.6 liter Volkswagen that's rated for 80 psi. Good night. So now I need to take my one other option, which is adding a compound. But that's attractive to me for the other reason we just set aside, which was that it's laggy. If I add a smaller second turbo, I'm going to get the pressure ratio I want without almost blowing up my big turbo. And then I'm also going to reduce the lagginess of my turbo system, and
it gets you
hopefully it's all
more
good. That's
boost
the theory.
it gets you more boost across a wider range of RPMs.
For sure. Yes.
That's what
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so for like your truck, for instance, you said how you're like contemplating what your future options are. I think a lot of race applications go with a big single because it's simple and whatever. They like basically redline the truck on a drag strip at idle. Well, that doesn't make any sense, but they redline it on the line with like NOS and all kinds of crazy shit going through it to make sure they have like crazy exhaust pressure coming out enough to spool a huge single turbo, and then they take off and it's gangster. It does everything they need and it's simpler. But as like someone who like tows and does normal things besides just redline your truck all day, my compounds make a lot of sense because you get that one that's slightly smaller that's going to spool up and feel really good around town, and then you're also going to have the overall performance boost of actually being able to far exceed the density that your single VNT stock 6.7 turbo is able to supply from the factory, which is pretty cool.
So it kind of gives you a lot more, better power options for everyday driving is kind of what you're saying. Like the big single is like if you're going to build a race truck kind of option versus compounds would still be good for everyday driving.
Yeah, exactly. And to some degree, they add a lot of heat, so you'd have to check you want to make sure like your intercooler is sufficient for what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
etc. But you're actually going to get a more reliable turbo setup out of it because you're actually asking less of each turbo.
Oh, interesting. I never thought about it
Yeah,
that
like
way.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
pretty
crazy.
interesting.
So something that's seen as a more of a performance upgrade by the general public, like doing something like compound turbos, which, like I mentioned earlier, Pusher has a kit where you can like pick your
Yeah,
turbo sizes. They have all the piping. They like tell you what you need. I think outside of like the tuning. And so, yeah, actually reducing the stress on each turbo, assuming, right, you can get the plumbing right and manage the heat, is what you're saying.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like if you had a pusher compound setup making even low numbers like 45 psi or something, each of those turbos is chilling. It's happy as a clam. Versus if you ask your VNT turbo that's on your truck now to make 45 psi, it probably would, but also like probably not nicely, you know.
No, it wouldn't
Like,
be happy about it.
it wouldn't be happy. You'd risk a long-term stress failure somewhere in your turbo if you were doing that.
But then with compounds, if you're consistently running like 50 psi, it may not stress each turbo more, but then you're potentially stressing other engine components more, right? Because you're making outside of the
For
like a
sure.
boost
We were
pressure.
ignoring
Yeah,
that.
yeah. We're controlling for other variables. So yeah, if you're
Yeah, yeah.
isolating for the turbos, it makes your turbos more reliable, but then you'd probably want to like head stud and do like a bunch of
Potentially.
other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it depends. The 6.7 in particular is the bomber motor. I mean, I don't know if you ever watched a video of how those things are put together, but you got like 6 bolts holding your main caps in on your crankshaft, and I mean, it's really rated for like a million billion horsepower. So I can't imagine you open it up and the rods are like toothpicks or anything. So I would gamble you can, and a lot of that's too of the control of that kind of thing. Like if you just put compounds on your truck, it wouldn't just like immediately explode. What is like the bomb switch is like adding fuel. Like if you put compounds on your truck and then you're like max fuel and did nothing else, like it probably would blow up because you're just like the fuel is what gives your air charge its volume once you make it go bang. It is all
Right.
the potential energy in the system. So the more potential energy you add, the more potential for catastrophic failure you invite into your life.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's a great segue. So I like where this is going because that was your other bottleneck on your diesel engine on the Rabbit was fueling. So maybe like we should talk about fueling. I know for like reliability's sake, the 6.7 PowerStroke's fuel system leaves a lot to be desired. That's probably like the number one talked about issue is everyone harping on the fuel pump. So, and obviously it's terrible. It's not a great design. The fact that it will self-destruct and, it's pushing fuel at like 20,000 PSI. So that aside, I think it'd
Yeah.
be interesting to dive into kind of your experience with fueling a diesel. And also, we can kind of talk about that more in a performance vein would be interesting.
Yeah, okay. In my personal experience with my own project motor, so this Volkswagen four-cylinder diesel, uh, I guess the blanket statement of like diesels are fuel regulated motors is a great place to start because they will do as much as you add fuel for. And especially like if you have a naturally aspirated diesel, which are one of the dumbest things ever made, uh, you're screwed because you can add fuel up until the amount of air you have, and then it's just soot and nothing else happens, and you get high EGTs and the thing wants to melt itself. But now you add a turbo, and you can start adding air to match all that fuel you just put in. And instead of having, well, you still get high EGTs, but instead of having like a melting, smoky, stupid, naturally aspirated thing, you get a beautiful, swooshy, jet like turbo diesel thing. And that's like pretty much the base concept is you're always adding fuel and air kind of as much as you can in equal parts. And the more fuel and air you get in there, the more it goes face, and the more you break things. So with my car, it was like just dealing with a lot of like misinformation and extreme lack of knowledge on my part when I was younger. Getting fuel into it was like a foreign concept somehow. And then when I finally did, it like way woke up. And at first, it wasn't turbo diesel. I should say that too. It was naturally aspirated diesel at first, pokey as hell, terribly slow. And then I finally put turbos on it or a turbo on it, and then started increasing my fueling. And part of the reason I got kind of like stymied on progress there is I sent my fuel pump to like a reputable, big quotes, like VW diesel pump rebuilder. And I told the guy, I was like, yeah, I want to make 200 horsepower, you know? And I wanted him to like build the snot out of that pump. And that's what I was expecting for like almost $1,000 in cost to do that. And I got it back, and my car was like 20% more peppy. And I thought, like, I didn't know what to expect at the time because I was much younger. And I thought that was what it needed. And to the point where when I started adding a turbo to it, it was still slow. And I was super confused. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Because I had these really small turbos on it because that's all it would spool. And then I finally figured out that the person who rebuilt the pump was a total shitbag, and has no idea what they're doing. I mean, they might, but they also just totally sold me a pump that puts out like no fuel. So as soon as I started increasing my fueling like 100%, then I was actually over spooling my teeny turbos, which were sized for way less fuel.
fuel.
Because the fuel, with way more fuel, you have like tenfold exhaust energy to drive a turbo, and all of a sudden these teeny turbos were bottlenecks. And I didn't realize how much of a problem it was until I literally split a turbo in half from overspeeding it, to the point that it blew up. I mean, that's where I blew my first motor. And then it pretty much happened again. Like, I just kept adding bigger turbos and adding more fuel until we got to my latest version. And what was my bottleneck kind of just before the last version is I have a Bosch VE pump, which is kind of on like old Cummins and like Land Cruiser, well, not Land Cruisers, like Nissan Patrols, and they're kind of all over the world on all sorts of different size diesel motors. But at any rate, the VE pump has a certain diameter pump head, and what actually injects the fuel is like a plunger slamming into the fuel in a like almost sewing machine like fashion, and compressing it against the wall, and it has nowhere to go except through the hard lines to your injectors. So that's what creates your fuel injection pressure, is like a hammer smashing fuel into a bottle. uh, and I basically tapped out the original setup of that for my car to the point where everything was turned in and up and to the max, and you couldn't get a drop more. And then I eventually realized you could just take the head off of a different pump, because like most Bosch VE stuff is like plug and play somehow. It's honestly mind boggling. But I took a larger diameter pump, so I'm now hitting it basically with a bigger hammer. So it's delivering, I don't even know how much more fuel. You could probably calculate it, but way more. And so now fuel is like finally not the bottleneck on this project. And I was able to bounce back to looking at turbos. So it's been kind of like a constant like chasing my tail of like, oh, which is the thing holding me up to making more power right now? And
And it's
it's
been
kind
like
of bouncing.
fuel or air. It's fuel, air,
Right,
fuel, air.
right.
It's
Fuel, air, fuel, air, fuel, air. And if you were really good at it, you would just nail the fuel amount of fuel with the turbo and the amount of air on the first try, and it would be sick. But
I mean, but
but
to
I
be
did not have
fair,
that much fun.
also, the car you're doing this on, there's like no documentation. There's no one is really doing this
That's
like
fair. That's
anywhere
fair. I
in the
mean,
world. Maybe
if you
maybe
did
they're
it
not
to a six,
documenting it, but
if you did it to a six though, you would know. You would know the formula if you went to the right person. They'd tell you use blah over injectors with blah turbo and blah tune, and you'll be great. You know. And on this car, you go on some stupid VW forum, and Keyboard Warrior 6.7 is saying like, "Yeah, you gotta do this, otherwise you're wrong." And none of them know what they're talking about at the end of the day, because none of them have bothered trying anything except running the stock setup. So, and the people who don't run the stock setup aren't on the forums because they also know Uh,
Jeez.
but it's interesting because you need both to make lots of power on your diesel, I guess is kind of the bottom line. And they need to match. So, I mean, in my case, it's trial and error, but if you were like tuning your newer diesel truck, you could just know that you need to have matched air and fuel combinations and don't like put a bigger turbo on it expecting not to have to tune it. But fortunately on new trucks you can, a lot of it's just in the computer, like it already has
Right.
plenty of fuel pressure behind it. You just need to allow it to inject more of it and to balance everything out.
Right. So that
Pretty
there,
slick
the
stuff.
key is just making sure you get a tune that wasn't written by a total hack,
Also
basically.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And too
that's
much
fair. And
fuel
you,
is a problem too.
I was gonna say you rebuilt the pump yourself after you found out that that guy didn't actually turn up the fueling on it. You got a pop
Yeah.
tester for your injectors. You pulled the pump apart and did all of that yourself, which
Yeah,
is
for sure.
pretty rowdy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm gonna do another little wave of that, kind of going with the new engine build. I don't really know when it's all going to be done because it's so much work, but I'm gonna like, because right now the pump that I'm running, like I swapped the fuel mushing part of it for the bigger one, and the part I swapped in was like from a not great reputable like VW part seller. So I'm gonna swap an actual Bosch VE head on before putting the whole setup in my new engine, because that's, I'd say, my other pro tip. If you're gonna do sketchy things, don't do them on your brand new dream engine you just spent hella time and money building. Like, don't do it. Blow up your old stupid shitty engine with all your new experiments before you build a sweet, perfect, everything's forged, whatever. Who cares? Bottom end, you know? Because then,
Mm,
because then when you do one dumb thing and you blow up the motor you just spent thousands on, it sucks. It totally sucks.
yeah. Yeah. That is definitely not what you want. Dang. So I guess for fuel, like you were saying before I kind of interjected there, that having too much fuel can be bad. So kind of hitting that sweet spot is important. And it sounds like if you have too much fuel, not enough air, you're just going to make your EGTs go through the roof and probably going to melt some stuff. Is that kind of a accurate synopsis?
For sure, yeah. Yeah, I would say so. When I finally got enough fuel going, I was on still like a pretty good sized turbo for this motor, but
Mm-hmm.
not quite big enough, or I just wasn't managing exhaust flow very well. And after taking it to the drag strip a few times, well, just to illustrate what too much fuel with not enough air does, it would shoot a flame out of my hood stack at night that you could see that was like probably, I don't know, 8 to 10 inches long, like just a glowing
Dang.
flame out of the exhaust. And that's post, like it went all the way through the turbo and came back out, and it's still on fire. And that's because the air fuel ratio is like grossly wrong. And that fortunately it was a Garrett turbo, so it didn't have some horrible catastrophic failure that my engine had to consume. But it did still fail. Like the turbo definitely got too hot or oversped or all of the above, and the like hot side oil seal failed. So when I took that turbo off, it was basically just like always smoking like a banshee because there was just like oil dumping into the exhaust.
Mm. Oh,
And
geez.
that's my direct experience with like too much fuel. But I think in like newer trucks, it's like certainly a problem. For one, you don't gain anything at a certain point because you're just like you like air, like that's how combustion works. You need air and fuel. Like if you just dump fuel in a box and seal it and try to light it with a match, nothing happens. Uh, and so keeping it even super important, especially on like your track where you have like a DPF and things like that. Like if you put like a sooty tune on that, you just be like shooting yourself directly in the foot.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is another thing that I know Banks talks a lot about with his tuners, like they try to balance that and make sure they get like the cleanest possible fuel air ratio with the maximum amount of power. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I feel
that's
like as a
interesting.
general rule of thumb, excluding how DPFs work, if your like diesel exhaust is clear, you're not using enough fuel when you're on it, and if it's like black, you're using too much. It's like a nice hazy gray looking thing is really what you're shooting for.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. Well, I really appreciate the chat. I honestly I learned some things that even though we talk regularly, like I wouldn't have gotten, I think, out of one of our other conversations. So it's kind of nice to do the long form interview style,
Oh,
and we're at like 40 minutes now. So I guess
yeah.
to wrap up, if I talked a little bit, or if we were to talk a little bit more about like reliability, you know, you have a vehicle that's close to 300,000 miles. That's a Ford. It's not a diesel, but for people on this channel who are looking to get longevity and reliability and maybe have fun with some go fast parts here and there, what advice would you give someone who's trying to get the most out of their vehicle, both kind of longevity and performance wise, or I should say reliability and performance wise?
Mm, yeah. Um, well, I'll preface this by saying my van has never broken down for what that's. I was doing this. Never broken down. And your power plant is only one part of your vehicle. You know, sure you own a PowerStroke, and this has a 5.4 in it, but both of them are cab on chassis vehicles capable of towing thousands of pounds that need to stop thousands of pounds and everything in between. And I feel like what it really comes down to is like doing your maintenance and keeping track of your maintenance. Like I think some people think that they do their maintenance because they got their oil changed sometime last month. They got their diff changed, and like recently I thought, like big air quotes there, it's like 16 years ago.
Yeah.
And like they have no idea. And it's not even necessarily their fault for not knowing because I don't remember what I did yesterday, but that's the whole point. You kind of have to recognize that, or at least to me, it seems like you got to recognize that your human brain is bad at remembering things, especially like the mileage at which you did something and the date. So
Mhm.
if you actually want your vehicle to stay in minty shape and not let you down, you just got to do your maintenance, but do it in a way where you keep track of it really accurately and that's easy to look at. Like for me personally, I like to run a Google spreadsheet and I put in my vehicle's mileage and I have all the regular services that Ford recommends and the things I know fail, like belts, fluid changes, brakes, like who cares? Things to check at certain intervals, and all those intervals I check or replace those things, and I keep track of it. And then everything I replace and check outside of that, I also keep track of. So there's never like oh, nah, it was done, it's fine. You just look, and it's either fine or it's not fine. If it's not fine, you do it. And then kind of the one other thing in that vein, I mean, I know I'm a mechanic, but is just to like poke around a bit. Like, don't ignore noises you hear. Don't write them off as nothing. Like, you should write them off as nothing after you investigate them and realize it's like your exhaust rattling or something. But like, just check, or like crawl into your truck once in a blue moon and be like, huh, is that leaking? Is it important? Was that my truck that was leaking in the parking lot? Like, all those things I feel like combined with the maintenance sheet really like set you up for like long-term vehicle success. Whereas like a lot of people, it's tough to say like how good cars even are these days because I'm pretty sure like 80% of people don't do any maintenance and the remaining 20% don't talk about it. So all you get is like, it's terrible. And it's really like Bilbo James in the corner who like bought his truck brand new in 2015 and hasn't changed the engine oil, the diff oil, the transmission fluid, or the coolant since buying it, and is wondering why his like fuel injector is plugged because he just put DEF in his diesel tank. Like irrelevant information you're getting from that guy.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really good. Well, I mean, knock on wood, I also have never broken down, knock on wood, but
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, same thing. And for those of you who follow the channel regularly, you know that when I do have like a big list of maintenance items, I kind of have the screenshot of the spreadsheet, and I got that from Ollie. So definitely big credit to you for that. I did log it before. I had a book and I like wrote everything in it, but I find the spreadsheet is really nice because you can search for things. You can like zoom out and kind of find stuff, you know, when it's like when there's a lot of items in there, especially with them being
Yeah.
Fords, there's a lot of items. So,
Oh,
you
a
know.
lot of items. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And I mean, you drive the shit out of your truck, like more than anyone I know. And I also drive the shit out of my vehicles. And I think that's kind of where the drive to like maintain the shit pile comes from. You know, like problem circled on the front, but only if you know what to do with it. Like,
Right. Yeah.
like I don't know. I take mine to like the middle of nowhere where there's no cell service and absolutely nothing, and you could easily get it stuck or fall off a cliff or like anything like that with it. And like, no, I don't want my spark plugs to go out right then, so I'll be changing them at 100,000 miles.
Yeah.
It's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, and I think poking around too is super big, you know, and it's one of those things where it's like if you don't know it's been done, like if it's not written down, it hasn't been done. Like you can't count it just because you know,
Yeah.
think you changed the oil a month ago. Yeah. Yeah, and I also think a big part of that is too like maintenance isn't fun to talk about. Like I've noticed that even
It's not
like
flashy.
no, not at all. And the whole like purpose of this channel, like it's definitely slow growth, but I was reminded of this because I started a TikTok account for the channel. So I've been doing like truck updates, and just like people will comment being like, well, that's boring. I'll see you in like 30 years or something like that. And it's like, but that's not the person you're really trying to appeal to. It's like, well, if you want to be like super entertained and go watch burnouts or, you know, whatever, but it definitely isn't, it's not flashy, but I think like you said, probably 80% of people just don't do maintenance. And then the other 20% sort of when they remember. And then there's like a few people there that are like really dialed and they're just online, but
the people that tell you they'll see you in 30 years won't see you in 30 years because their vehicle will be fucking broken down. And as a tangent, all the very small tangent, all the flashy content you watch that's of like crazy built vehicles took like years of someone's life in a very not flashy way to make that like one flashy
true.
video after like so much time spent building it. So I don't know. I feel like people just write off the depth of things frequently, but like
It is
certainly
easy to
worth
do.
taking care of your stuff at a minimum and at a maximum. I don't know where I was going with that. Take care of your stuff.
Yeah. No, cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. It was fun chatting, and like I said, I definitely learned some new things. And I mean, we didn't even get into. I don't know. We could have talked about a lot of other things. Oliver's also been doing oil testing, and we have our own opinions about that too. But we could save that for another time. If you, the viewer, enjoyed this episode of my maintenance talk, let me know in the comments below. If you have any suggestions on guests, also let me know that. We're going to keep this rolling. I'm going to try to do one episode a month with someone who is an expert or technician or what have you in the kind of diesel engine space, and have them on to chat with you. So be sure to subscribe and give the video a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time here on PowerStroke Maintenance. Cheers.